The rumors began as softly as the falling of ash, so quietly that no one could say who had first spoken them, and yet by the week's end they burned across every drawing-room in London. The Duke of Ravenscroft, they said, had taken an interest in Lady Evelina Harcourt, the penniless daughter of a forgotten baronet. No one believed it at first. How could such a man, rich, cynical, impossible to impress, see worth in a girl who owned neither fortune nor powerful friends? Yet disbelief never stilled gossip, it only sharpened its teeth. Evelina first heard of it while taking tea with her mother, in a room where the wallpaper peeled at the corners and the silver had long surrendered its shine. Mrs. Harcourt's hand trembled as she poured. "They are laughing about you, dearest. They say he sends you flowers, though I see none." Evelina, whose pride was often her only shield, smiled faintly. "Then let them laugh. It costs them nothing, and it costs me no truth." Still, she wondered. It was true that every Thursday a bouquet appeared at their door, simple arrangements, never extravagant, white roses, violets, sometimes lilac tied with dark ribbon. The footman who delivered them never spoke, and no card accompanied them. Her mother would frown, insisting they be placed out of sight, yet Evelina could never quite resist saving one bloom for her desk. Society's curiosity soon turned cruel. At Mrs. Linton's supper, she was seated beside a viscount's daughter whose tongue was as sharp as her fan. "You must feel most fortunate," the lady drawled, "to be so noticed. His Grace is not known for acts of charity." The laughter that followed was discreet but deadly. Evelina, her cheeks burning, folded her napkin and replied with quiet dignity, "Then perhaps it is not charity, but something rarer, kindness." That silenced them, though only for a moment. What she did not know was that Alaric Thorne, Duke of Ravenscroft, had been watching her since that disastrous winter ball. He had not meant to. He found the politics of courtship tedious, the chatter of debutantes hollow. Yet her humiliation that night had struck him like a mirror held to his own vanity. He had watched her try to disappear, and something within him, some long-ignored sense of decency, had rebelled. In her eyes he had seen defiance, not defeat. It intrigued him more than any beauty he had yet encountered. He sent the flowers not for courtship, but because he wanted to remind her she was seen. Or so he told himself. But as the weeks unfurled, his restraint began to wear thin. It was on a rain-dark afternoon in Hyde Park that their paths crossed again. Evelina had agreed, against her better judgment, to accompany a neighbor for the promenade. The carriages moved in slow procession, parasols blooming like pale petals beneath the drizzle. Her companion chattered about upcoming balls. Evelina stared out at the lake, where raindrops rippled the surface like sighs. Then she saw him, riding alone, his great black horse gleaming wet, his coat dark as stormlight. The Duke dismounted with practiced grace and approached her carriage without hesitation. Her companion gasped, whispering his name as though summoning a curse. "Lady Evelina," he said, bowing slightly, rain dripping from his hair. His voice was low, deliberate, the kind that made listeners lean closer. She drew herself up, startled yet composed. "Your Grace, this is unexpected." "Most truths are," he replied. "I feared you might have forgotten me. I could not forget the cause of my embarrassment so easily." He smiled, faintly, not with amusement but admiration. "Then I owe you an apology, and perhaps the privilege of repayment." Her companion's eyes widened. Propriety demanded retreat. "Lady Evelina," she murmured nervously, "we must be going." But the Duke stepped closer, resting one gloved hand upon the carriage's frame. "I have offended you," he said softly, "and yet you accept my flowers." She met his gaze, unflinching despite the crowd that now pretended not to stare. "I accepted them because I could not send them back without knowing who sent them." "You have corrected that mystery. Then allow me to deliver them myself, henceforth." Her pulse stuttered. The rain thickened around them. "That would be improper, Your Grace." "Indeed," he said, a trace of humor warming his words. "Improper things often are the most honest." He took her hand where it rested on the window ledge and pressed his lips to her glove, too long for decency, too brief for comfort. When he looked up, there was something unguarded in his expression, as if the gesture had startled even him. The carriage lurched forward. her companion tugging at the reins. Evelina sat back, heart trembling. Behind them, the Duke stood motionless in the rain, the brim of his hat low over his eyes. By evening, London was aflame with talk. "He kissed her hand in public," cried the Dowager Lady Seton. "In Hyde Park, no less." Invitations that had once come hesitantly now ceased altogether. Yet Evelina found she could not regret it. In the privacy of her room, she opened the window to the night air and let the damp scent of roses drift in. Beneath the moonlight, she whispered, "What manner of man are you, to endanger me so, and yet make me feel less afraid?" Across the city, Alaric stood at his study window, watching rain-traced silver paths down the glass. He told himself he had done nothing dishonorable. But the truth, deep and unspoken, pressed against his chest. She was no longer merely an object of curiosity. She had become his measure of worth, the one person whose opinion could wound him. The following morning, a new bouquet arrived. This time, not of roses but of violets. Tucked within was a small volume of poetry, Byron's verses, bound in worn leather. Inside the cover, in a hand both strong and restrained, lay a single line, "You are not invisible." Her mother, finding the gift, fretted until tears gathered in her eyes. "Evelina, this must end. A duke's notice is a dangerous thing. You will be ruined." But Evelina only traced the violet with her fingertip, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then let the ruin be mine to bear." And though she meant to sound resolute, somewhere beneath her defiance bloomed a fragile hope, as unstoppable as spring beneath the frost. The whispers began like wind beneath a door, soft, persistent, impossible to ignore. By the close of the week, London's drawing-rooms swelled with one delicious rumor. The Duke of Ravenscroft, Alaric Thorne, had taken an interest in Lady Evelina Harcourt. The notion was absurd, and yet the absurdity of it made it irresistible. He was one of the richest men in England, famous for his hauteur and untouchable pride. She, a lady by name but not by fortune, lived quietly on the edge of society's fading light. No one could say who began the story, but once spoken, it fed on itself like fire on paper. Evelina first heard of it while accompanying her mother on a morning call to Mrs. Bracknell, a widow of considerable social energy. The older lady's eyes gleamed as she poured tea. "My dear Miss Harcourt," she began, "you must forgive the tattle of idle tongues, but it seems His Grace has developed a rather, shall we say, devoted attention toward you?" Evelina's cup nearly slipped from her hand. "I think you mistake me for someone of consequence," she replied. Mrs. Bracknell's smile widened, kind and cruel all at once. "Oh, my dear, consequence has never restrained affection. It is often what incites it." The conversation haunted her all afternoon. At home, her mother fretted over the same rumor, her thin fingers twisting in agitation. "Evelina, my love, such talk can wound more than it flatters. The Duke is not a man for games, and we cannot afford the laughter of others." Evelina nodded, but inwardly she wondered, why would he notice her at all? He had barely spoken during their solitary dance at the winter ball, yet that single waltz had altered the course of her existence. His voice, low and distant as thunder, had lingered in her thoughts long after the music ceased. 2 days later, a parcel arrived. No note, no crest, only a modest bouquet of pale violets wrapped in ivory ribbon. Evelina held them as one might hold a secret. Her mother assumed they were from a friend, but Evelina knew few who could afford flowers in February. She placed them in water, told herself it was meaningless, and yet that night, when she extinguished the candle, the faint scent of violets seemed to whisper her name. The following week, another bouquet came. Then another. Always on Thursday, always without explanation. By the fourth delivery, London's whispers had turned sharp as needles. At a dinner party, a baron's daughter leaned toward Evelina with a smile too polished to be kind. "My compliments, Lady Evelina. The Duke's attention must be, how shall I put it? An interesting experiment for you." The table's laughter rippled like broken glass. Evelina felt her pride tremble, but her voice remained calm. "I do not regard human decency as an experiment," she said, and lifted her glass without another word. Alaric heard of that reply before the evening was out. He smiled, not the smile of amusement, but of recognition. She had met mockery with grace, insult with serenity. He had not meant for his gestures to become a spectacle, but now he found himself unrepentant. There was something about her quiet defiance that disarmed him. He had long since grown immune to flattery, yet this woman, without effort, without artifice, had unsettled his composure. Rain swept across London the next morning, draping the city in a silvery gloom. Evelina ventured into Hyde Park with her cousin, hoping the drizzle would thin the crowd. Instead, it brought the Duke. His horse appeared first, a tall, dark creature gleaming wet beneath the storm. Then he himself emerged, every inch the figure that gossip adored, broad-shouldered, severe, eyes like stormlight. When he dismounted, her cousin gasped audibly. "Lady Evelina," he greeted, removing his hat with deliberate precision. "I feared the weather might keep you indoors." She could not disguise her surprise. "Your Grace, this meeting was not arranged." "No," he said, stepping closer, rain streaking down his coat, "but some meetings require no arrangement." Her cousin glanced about nervously, aware that others had begun to watch. "Perhaps another time," she murmured, but the Duke's attention did not waver. "I understand I have caused you discomfort," he said to Evelina, "and for that I beg your pardon. Yet I confess, I would sooner endure censure than indifference." She met his gaze, steady despite the tightening in her chest. "You risk much by saying such things, my lord. Society has no mercy for misplaced curiosity." "Then let it condemn me," he answered. "I am long acquainted with its cruelty." His voice softened. "Ah, you." The question pierced her composure. She should have looked away, but she did not. "More than I care to remember," she whispered. For a heartbeat they stood in the rain, the world around them hushed. Then, with an audacity that drew gasps from nearby carriages, he took her hand and pressed his lips against her glove. It was not the gesture of a seducer, but of a man surrendering something unspoken. When he released her, his expression was unreadable. "Forgive me," he said, "but I find I am growing poor in restraint." Before she could reply, her cousin ordered the driver onward, and the carriage rolled away through the mist. Evelina sat motionless, her pulse a quiet drumbeat in her throat. Behind them, the Duke remained where he stood, his figure blurred by rain. By nightfall, the scandal had spread. Some called it romance, others ruin. Evelina endured her mother's tears in silence. When the house grew still, she climbed to her chamber, found the violets upon her desk, and held them to her face. The scent was delicate, almost mournful. "What are you doing to me?" she murmured into the dark. Across the city, Alaric stood at his study window, drenched in the same question. The rain struck the panes like restless fingers. He told himself it was folly, yet he knew he would send more flowers come Thursday. Not out of pity nor pride, but because somewhere between her dignity and his own arrogance, something perilous had begun to bloom, something neither of them could yet name. The storm arrived without warning, sweeping across the countryside with a fury that turned roads into rivers and lamps into trembling ghosts. Lady Evelina Harcourt had set out for a charitable gathering at Ravenscroft Manor under the assurance of clear skies, but by nightfall the heavens had undone every promise. The wind howled against the carriage as lightning tore the horizon. When the driver declared the path impassable, her chaperone made the only sensible choice, to seek shelter at the Duke's estate, though the impropriety of it chilled Evelina more than the storm itself. Ravenscroft Manor loomed like a cathedral carved from shadow. Its windows glowed faintly, each one a promise of warmth and peril. Servants rushed forward, ushering the soaked ladies inside. Within, the scent of wood smoke and polished oak replaced the scent of rain. The Duke himself descended the grand staircase, his expression one of startled recognition quickly masked by courtesy. "Miss Harcourt," he said, bowing with grave composure, "it appears fate continues to conspire in my favor." Evelina curtsied, her voice measured. "Fate has a strange sense of humor, Your Grace. I would not presume to call this convenient." He studied her, the corner of his mouth curving ever so slightly. "Convenience has never been my acquaintance," he murmured. To the servants, he commanded rooms prepared, a fire lit, and warm wine served. His tone carried the weight of habit, authority laced with something gentler, something she could not yet name. Hours later, as the storm raged unrelenting, the house fell into uneasy quiet. Evelina could not sleep. The wind rattled the windows like restless spirits, and the unfamiliar grandeur of the guest chamber pressed upon her senses. Seeking calm, she left her room, drawn by the flicker of firelight spilling from a half-open door. It was the library, a vast sanctuary lined with books whose spines glimmered like old jewels. There, by the hearth, stood Alaric Thorne. He was unbuttoned at the collar, a glass of brandy in hand, the fire painting his features in amber and gold. "You should not wander alone," he said without turning. "This house is large enough to lose even one's good intentions." Evelina stepped into the room, the hem of her gown whispering against the rug. "And yet you seem at ease within your labyrinth, your grace. I envy such composure." He faced her then, his expression softened by the shadows. "Composure," he said, "is only habit. It conceals more than it reveals." Her gaze drifted to the fire. "Then what does it conceal in you?" He hesitated, as though unaccustomed to questions that required truth. "A certain weariness," he admitted at last. "A man who has lived too long among those who barter affection as if it were coin grows disenchanted." She regarded him quietly. "And yet you persist in their company." "I persist," he said, "because I must. Titles are cages gilded with duty. One learns to decorate the bars." His voice dropped lower. "But you carry no such ornament. You move through cruelty as though it cannot touch you." "That is not courage," she replied softly. "It is endurance. One learns it when the world refuses kindness." The fire cracked, filling the silence between them. He set down his glass and took a slow step nearer. "When I sent those flowers," he said, "I did not mean to cause you harm. I thought only to remind you that gentleness still existed. But it seems I've offered you nothing but grief." Evelina lifted her chin. "You offered me confusion, your grace. The world already gives me pity. I do not know what to make of your attention." "Nor do I," he said simply. "I meant to forget you." It proved impossible. The honesty in his tone unsettled her. "You speak as though it were misfortune." He gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Perhaps it is. You have undone a man who once believed himself untouchable." His eyes searched hers, unguarded now. "Do you know what it is to desire peace, and find instead a person?" Her breath faltered. "You cannot say such things." "I can say little else," he replied. "Every word unspoken corrodes within me." The fire flared, its glow tracing the tension between them. Evelina clasped her hands to still their trembling. "You mistake gratitude for affection. Whatever you feel, it is born of pity or novelty. It will fade." He shook his head slowly. "I have known novelty, and I have known desire. What I feel for you is neither. It is something quieter, and far more dangerous." Her composure wavered. "You speak as though I am free to answer you. You know the ruin that would follow." "I do," he said. "And yet I find I would risk it." He drew nearer, stopping close enough that the warmth of the fire mingled with his breath. "Tell me to leave you in peace, and I will. Tell me that your heart is untouched, and I will be silent forever." She searched his face. The restraint, the longing, the torment of a man unaccustomed to helplessness. The truth trembled at the edge of her lips, yet she could not let it pass. "You cannot ask me to speak what propriety forbids," she whispered. He smiled faintly, a shadow of sadness in it. "Then let the silence answer for us both." For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the storm outside, the flames within, the pulse between them. She felt the weight of his gaze, not demanding but reverent, as though he feared the mere act of looking might break her. Then, slowly, he took her hand. He did not lift it to his lips this time. He only held it, as if anchoring himself to something real. "You are not my possession," he said quietly. "I do not wish to own you. Only to stand beside you, should you ever choose to let me." She withdrew her hand gently, her voice unsteady. "And if I never do, then I shall still be grateful," he said, "for having met the one woman who made me remember I had a soul." The words lingered as she turned away, her heart both aflame and aching. When she left him, the door closed softly, but not before she heard him exhale a single weary breath. Outside, dawn crept pale over the wet fields, and as her carriage carried her away, she found upon the seat a single violet, fresh, uncrushed, and newly cut. She held it to her heart, knowing the truth she dared not speak, that the storm had not ended. It had only changed its name. Spring arrived as though it had been holding its breath through the long winter, and yet for Evelina Harcourt, the season brought no renewal, only quiet despair. The Duke of Ravenscroft had not written, not called, not even sent the violets that had once been her Thursday solace. The scandal of their encounter in Hyde Park had subsided into silence, but silence, she found, could wound more deeply than mockery. Society had moved on to fresher gossip, yet she remained the ghost of a story that had ended too abruptly. She told herself she was relieved. Dignity, after all, was a woman's last defense. But when she lay awake at night, the memory of his voice, low, confessional, trembling between restraint and longing, returned to her like a forbidden prayer. In May, word reached her that the Duke was soon to be engaged to Lady Arabella Whitcomb, a young woman of immense fortune and flawless breeding. The announcement was expected, and yet it struck Evelina with a sharpness she could not conceal. Her mother received the news with a sigh of resignation. "It is as it should be, my love. You have escaped heartbreak by the grace of circumstance." Evelina smiled faintly, but her heart felt hollow. She wished she could hate him. It would have been easier than remembering the warmth of his hand in the firelight, the sincerity in his eyes when he spoke of truth and ruin. London prepared for the Queen's spring ball, the grandest affair of the season, and though Evelina had no desire to attend, duty required her presence as companion to a noble widow. The night of the ball shimmered with excess. Crystal chandeliers glowed like captured constellations, and the air swelled with perfume and expectation. She wore a gown of palest blue, chosen precisely because it drew no attention. She meant to observe, not to be seen. Yet when she entered the ballroom, every sound seemed to fade, for at the top of the marble staircase stood Alaric Thorne. He had arrived later than the rest, his presence causing an almost imperceptible ripple through the crowd. The orchestra faltered, ladies whispered behind their fans, and men watched with wary amusement. The Duke of Ravenscroft had returned to courtly life, and beside him, conspicuously absent, was Lady Arabella. Evelina's pulse quickened despite her resolve. She turned her gaze toward the floor, but instinct told her he had seen her. As the evening unfolded, she kept to the shadows, her composure her only armor. Yet each time she looked across the room, she found him near, never speaking, never approaching, but always within sight, as though tethered by something neither could sever. When the Queen entered, the music ceased. Courtiers bowed and curtsied, and the Duke stepped forward to greet Her Majesty. This was the moment, everyone knew, when he would confirm his engagement and seal his alliance with one of the kingdom's most powerful families. Evelina tried to steady her breathing, telling herself she would watch unmoved, that nothing he did could touch her now. The Queen, regal and amused, inquired, "Your Grace, is it true we may expect felicitations soon?" The crowd hushed. All eyes turned toward him. For a heartbeat, he hesitated. Then, with the calm of a man walking willingly into ruin, he said, "Your Majesty, there is but one woman to whom I would offer such devotion, and she is not among the names whispered to your court." A murmur rippled through the ballroom. The Queen's brows lifted in curiosity. "Then who, pray, commands the heart of Ravenscroft?" Alaric turned, and his gaze found Evelina across the gilded expanse. Every eye followed his. The moment stretched, fragile and absolute. "She stands yonder," he said, his voice carrying with unflinching clarity, "and I beg your permission to dance with her." Gasps filled the air. Evelina froze, the color draining from her cheeks. Her chaperone grasped her arm, whispering frantically, "You must not. For heaven's sake, think what they will say." But the Duke was already crossing the room, his every step a declaration. The crowd parted in silence, the orchestra poised between scandal and admiration. When he reached her, He bowed deeply. "Lady Evelina," he said softly, "will you grant me the honor of this waltz?" Her voice trembled, though she forced it steady. "You make a spectacle of what should be private." "Then let privacy be damned," he murmured. "The truth has hidden long enough." He extended his hand. "One dance, and I will trouble you no more, if that is your wish." The music began, hesitant at first, then swelling into the slow rise of a waltz. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Evelina placed her gloved hand in his. The contact was at once perilous and inevitable. As they moved together across the floor, the world seemed to contract to the circle of their motion. The murmurs, the chandeliers, the judgment, all distant echoes. "I had thought you lost to me," she whispered, unable to contain the ache in her chest. "I was lost," he replied, "until I understood that pride cannot warm an empty heart." "You will regret this," she warned, though her voice lacked conviction. "Then I will regret it as a free man," he said. "Not as a coward who let the only truth of his life wither beneath convention." The waltz quickened, the violins rising like wings. Her eyes shone with tears she would not shed. "You do not know what you ask of me." "I ask nothing," he said. "I only return what you gave me, the courage to feel." When the final note faded, silence claimed the room. The Duke released her hand and turned to the Queen. "Your Majesty," he said with calm defiance, "you have my loyalty as a subject, but as a man, my allegiance lies elsewhere." Then, before the stunned assembly, he bowed to Evelina, not as a lord to a lady, but as a penitent to his Redeemer. The scandal was immediate, yet in that silence, Evelina felt no fear. For the first time, she saw not the arrogance of a duke, but the humility of a man who had chosen truth over reputation. The orchestra began again, softly, as though to mask the murmurs. Alaric straightened, meeting her gaze one final time. "Whatever follows," he said, "know that my heart was never prouder than in kneeling before you." She could not speak, only incline her head, her heart unsteady with both terror and wonder. Around them, society's glittering edifice began to fracture, and through its cracks, something human, something holy, began to bloom. As the music swelled once more, she realized that history would forget the details, the scandal, the whispers. But it would never forget the moment a duke defied the world for love, and the woman who found her freedom in forgiving him.